Anastasia inhaled deeply. Anastasia, you're ready for this. Trust me. Of course I trust you. You'll do fine, and you'll be able to keep what you see a secret. But why, Mother? Because the future should only be known to the light. He is the creator. Anastasia sighed and slowly nodded. Excellent. Now take a moment to ready yourself. She closed her eyes, took another breath, and opened them again. I'm ready. Her mother lifted her right hand. It shone with the same type of light that Adria's mark had. She stared at her mother's hand with wide eyes. Prepare yourself. This is going to be truly enlightening, as well as intense. Her mother placed her hand on Anastasia's forehead. Anastasia gasped as a surge of energy passed from her mother's hand and into her head. She tensed up as her vision slowly dimmed again. After a few seconds, her vision came back. Now, she stood in Yanara's entrance hall. It was nighttime, and there were terrible screams coming from the town. She dashed to the doors and pushed them open. What she saw made her cry out in horror. The town was ablaze. The buildings burned as hundreds of soldiers filled the streets, trying to repel the onslaught of werewolves that stormed Yanara from its great gate, which was blown to pieces. Horses whinnied in fear. Commanders yelled orders to their soldiers, and the citizens of Yanara fled the carnage. The smoke from the burning buildings filled the air, making her cover her nose and mouth. There was a huge explosion, which made her crouch down and stare around wildly. All legions, move forward! Kill them all! A voice boomed throughout the burning town. Anastasia gasped. She recognized that voice. It was the original sorcerer, Simon. He must have magically amplified his voice. Princess Anastasia! She heard another voice yell. She looked around behind her and saw Renalta running across the hall to her. We need to help the citizens to get to the temple, she yelled. Anastasia teared up as she realized what her mother was showing her. This was the coming invasion of Yanara by the creatures of darkness. She clasped her hand to her mouth and closed her eyes. Anastasia, a third voice yelled. She opened her eyes and saw her father come down from the stairs into the entrance hall. He wore his full armor and sword. You go to the Temple of the Light with Renalta and help as many citizens as you can. I need to help defend our home, he yelled. Father, do as I say. She sniffed and nodded. Her father ran past her and down into the town. Soldiers followed behind him, and some helped the citizens to escape the battle. They guided the men, women, and children up the stairs and into the entrance hall. As they packed the hall and shouted their fear, Renalta made her way to the top of the steps. Come on, Renalta shouted. Anastasia drew in a deep breath and let out slowly. Follow us, Renalta told the citizens. Together, she and the priestess led the groups of elf men, women, and children through the castle, aided by several groups of soldiers. They all gathered in the Temple of the Light and shut the doors behind them. The soldiers guarded the doors, while Renalta, Anastasia, and the young acolytes helped to divide the citizens throughout the inner sanctum of the temple in its top levels. The citizens were terrified. Never had such an invasion taken place, but the men volunteered to help pass out what food and water was available, while the women comforted their children, who huddled together and did their best not to weep. Anastasia did her best to remain calm as well, while she, Renalta, and the acolytes walked throughout the levels of the temple, making sure that the citizens were as taken care of as they could be. All the while, she could hear the battle being raged throughout her homeland. More explosions sounded outside of the castle, and the terrible glow of the burning building shone through the stained window of the temple, and the howls of the werewolves reached her ears. When the citizens on the top levels were as calm as they could be, Anastasia walked back down to the inner sanctum. The soldiers stood in formation around the doors. The ones with swords and shields were in front, while the archers were to the sides of the sanctum. The citizens sat on either the pews or the floor in small groups. Anastasia walked onto the dais. She knelt, bumped her head over her folded hands, closed her eyes, praying to the light for help. Suddenly, the sounds of the battle ceased. It was now eerily quiet. She opened her eyes and stood. The citizens all muttered to each other as the acolytes and Renalta gathered at the entrance to the temple behind the soldiers. Anastasia stepped down from the dais and made her way over to them as well. Is the battle over? She wondered. Hard to tell. This could be just a stall in the action, a soldier replied. Then there was a loud knocking on the doors of the temple. The soldiers held their positions as the young acolytes huddled around Renalta. Open the doors, the voice of Simon the sorcerer demanded. Never, the soldiers shouted back. Open them now, or I'll blast the doors down and slaughter every man, woman, and child in this temple. The citizens all tensed up. A soldier began to give orders to the others, but Anastasia stepped forward. Princess Anastasia, stand back, the soldier said. No, open the doors. What? You heard me, soldier. That's an order. He stared at her with wide eyes. This may be an invasion, but I'm still your princess, and I said to open the doors. The soldiers all protested this, but Anastasia held firm. If we don't, he'll blast them down anyway. The commander considered this for a few moments. All right, but stay behind us. Anastasia nodded. The soldiers opened the doors. The sorcerer stood at the head of a small group of sorcerers just outside of the temple's entrance. He had his hood down and his long silver hair fell to his neck. He stared at them with a wicked grin. Your defenses failed. Hand over the stones, or we will kill everyone in this temple. Anastasia closed her eyes. She knew what she had to do. Very well. Princess Anastasia, Renalta shouted. Anastasia opened her eyes and faced her. If we don't surrender the stones, our citizens will be slaughtered, she stated. Renalta stared at her with an ashen face, but she slowly nodded as well. Anastasia made her way up to the top level of the temple, each step feeling like a huge weight. The guards stood at the pillar with the wood chest on top. She ordered them to move aside, and they obeyed. She opened the chest and stared down at the stones. All of them were there: earth, fire, water, wind, body, mind, and soul. She gathered them up in both of her hands and walked back down to the inner sanctum. Renalta stood to the side, her arms crossed and a scowl on her face. The soldiers stood at the ready as Anastasia walked up to Simon. She held out stones in her hands. Splendid, he said with a perverse pleasure. She grudgingly put stones into his cupped hands. After that was done, she stepped back from him, her arms now crossed. You have what you came for. Now leave. Simon put the stones into a black satin pouch tied around his waist. He then looked back up to her. I'm afraid not. Orders are to kill you after we retrieve the stones. Anastasia backed up a few more steps as the soldiers converged on a group of sorcerers. But there were flashes of scarlet red light, which temporarily blinded Anastasia. She covered her eyes as the citizens all yelled in terror. Children cried for protection, while the parents did their best to gather them up and retreat further into the temple. When she could see again, Anastasia saw that most of the soldiers were scorched to death. The smell of their burnt flesh and hair sickened her. Simon stood at the front of the sorcerers, his face lit up with a sinful delight. The honors of killing you, Princess Anastasia, are all mine. He lifted his hand and aimed his palm at her. Anastasia closed her eyes and held her breath. Leave my house, O servant of the darkness. She opened her eyes and looked around. Adria stood behind her. She wore her full armor and sword. Not only that, but her eyes shone with a powerful light. She then heard frightened yells and turned around. The group of sorcerers all retreated from the temple, but Simon held his ground and stared unblinkingly into the eyes of the light. I shall take my leave, but first, one last bit of revelation. He looked back to Anastasia with an evil smile. Your father tried to fight us. He put up a good struggle, but in the end, Anastasia took in a sharp breath as a heart raced in her chest. She felt her face pale as the sorcerer finished his revelation. No, she fell to her knees and covered her eyes. Tears streamed down them as she trembled with her sorrow.